we are officially 2/3 of the way through all of the books of the Bible. Woohoo! According to my math, we will be done with every book sometime at the beginning of July. Whoa. Today we are looking at the book of the Bible where most people bail on their chronological Bible reading plan. The book of Leviticus. For most people, this book feels really dry and boring. It's just a bunch of ancient laws that don't apply to me anymore. Why do I need to read it? Well, you're right, it is a bunch of ancient laws. There's only one narrative in the entire book, in chapter 10. The rest of it is specific case laws and purity rituals and sacrificial details. And while these rules are specific to the nation of Israel and their covenant relationship with God, there are a couple reasons why it's still significant for us to read this today. Firstly, what these laws say reveals the heart of God. I know lots of people look to these parts of the Bible and they try to highlight how regressive and outdated these laws are. How can you worship a God who asks people to do that? But over the years, I've learned two things about these kinds of arguments. Firstly, they often ignore the subversive ways that God was using these laws to push Israelite society towards his ideal. I phrased it like this before. These laws always move towards God's ideal, but they aren't always there yet. Laws that seem really regressive to us today were actually significant, defiant steps to challenge the culture of that day. So that's one thing. These laws are often misinterpreted as rigid and oppressive when really they were far ahead of their time. But the second thing that I've learned is that the people who make these kind of arguments really haven't read the whole book. Because if you were to read through the whole book, you would find a large number of laws protecting the poor and vulnerable in ways that would even challenge our progressive society today. Here are just a couple examples. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. In the nation of God's people, the needy and the outsider are provided for. Later in the book, the language becomes even more surprising. If any of your fellow Israelites become poor and are unable to support themselves among you, help them as you would a foreigner and stranger, so they can continue to live among you. Whoa, did you catch that? If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor, you are to show as much love and care towards them as you would a foreigner. So it's not love the stranger as your neighbor, it's love your neighbor as a stranger. That is how upside down God's social system is. And there are amazing verses like this all over the book. Just read it slowly and consider what the culture of the day might have been doing in comparison. So that's the first reason I think this book is important to read, because what these laws say reveals the heart of God. God was pushing his people to become a society that would challenge the cultural norms of the world around them. They were to model the very heart of God through the ways that God was asking them to live. But the second reason is perhaps even more important. It's not just what these laws say that reveals the heart of God. It's why these laws exist that also reveals the heart of God. See, God isn't just giving a bunch of rules because he's in charge and he can make people do what he wants. These laws and rituals serve a purpose. What is that purpose? God wants to dwell with his people. That's what he wanted in the very beginning, but sin broke the relationship and separated us from God. But God doesn't want to just be in relationship from afar, barking down orders from heaven, sending the occasional blessing. No, God wants to still dwell with his people, to be in their midst. He wants a piece of that Eden experience. And so he makes provision for that to still happen. This theme is all throughout the Bible. Now notice how Leviticus factors into this picture. In Exodus, God tells the people to build a tabernacle. Why? Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. Aha, there it is. God wants to dwell with his people. So the back half of Exodus details every thread and measurement for this tabernacle. And eventually, the people complete their work on this elaborate tent structure. But there's a problem. Right before Leviticus starts, we read this right at the end of Exodus. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Do you see the problem? They've built a place for God to be with them, and they can't go in. Oops. Why can't they go in? Well, there's a long answer to this, but the short answer is they ain't ready. God is so holy, so unique and distinct and pure, that the people have to prepare themselves in order to dwell with him and enter into his sacred space. So notice something. This is really cool. Leviticus 1 verse 1 starts like this. The Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Now, if you turn to the first words of the next book of the Bible, Numbers, we read this. The Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting. You notice the difference? At the start of Leviticus, Moses is outside the tent. But at the start of Numbers, Moses is inside the tent. What happened? Leviticus happened. The book of Leviticus is about how God makes provision for his imperfect people to dwell with him. Now, if you were to just scan through Leviticus, you'd see a bunch of laws and rituals. There are commands about ritual purity, what makes a person clean or unclean. There are specific details about offerings and sacrifices. There are job requirements and rituals listed for priests. And all that might sound really boring, and it is if you miss what's happening. I think many people make the mistake of viewing Leviticus as a code book of laws, when really it's a recipe for Israel to be in relationship with God. Just listen to this language that comes later in the book. I will put my dwelling place among you, and I will not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. I will walk among you. What does this sound like? This sounds like Eden, doesn't it? The tabernacle and the whole book of Leviticus is about God's desire for overlap, to have a mini Eden with his people. It's a message that despite our unfaithfulness, God won't let us slip out of his grip. He's committed to be with us. That was true for ancient Israel, and it's true for us today. He wants to be with you. God doesn't want a master-slave relationship. He wants a father-child relationship. The question for today is this: how can you live life with God? Not how can you live life for him or under him, with him. Leviticus, like the rest of the Bible, shows God's desire to be with humanity. And the way for this to happen in the Old Testament was a lot different than today. We can thank Jesus for that. But the general principle is still the same. When God dwells with you, you live and act differently as a result. So what does it mean to go through life with God here in 2020? This might be the vaguest question that I've asked in this series so far, but I want to keep it broad and just let you think about it. Spend a few minutes in quiet thought or in prayer or go on a walk and just contemplate what your life looks like when you live it with God. That's what I want you to think about today. The book of the Bible that we'll go to for tomorrow, our last video of the week will be tomorrow, is Zephaniah. Ooh, just what you were waiting for. All right, need to do some reading on this one. Have a great rest of your day. See you tomorrow.